First flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
So official. Do the countdown. Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Health or High Water podcast. Thank you for the returning guests. And if you're new to this, thank you so much for joining us. Brett here, along with my awesome co-host, Mr. Tripp.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Again with the Spanish. We have an awesome guest today, you guys. First of all, I hope you're having a great day. We have an awesome guest today. We're going to get into a very interesting conversation. First of all, Tamara, how you doing? How's your day going?
Pretty good. It's
Good.
nice that it's nice out.
It is so beautiful. I thought it was gonna cool down for a bit, and then it just started heating up again.
I'm very confused by it. This is not typical September weather.
But I'm not gonna complain though. I don't mind it. We'll take as much summer as we can get, right?
Agree.
What's the alternative? Us getting stuck in traffic with snow?
Yeah.
True.
I hope we have a mild winter, honestly.
What I always say is, like, if it would just snow a couple days in the winter, just a ton, then we don't have to deal with the fires, like, that'd be fine. But the everyday snow is what I don't like. And I'm from Colorado, so I don't know why I'm still here if I hate snow.
We'll put it in the Mother Nature complaint box. Hopefully she'll listen.
You can move to Wisconsin, where I'm from, and you'll just get gray skies and snow for 6 months out of the year.
No, I went to Purdue briefly. I'm good with the Midwest.
So Tamara is doing a lot of stuff. She's a wellness coach. She does programming, specializes with women, also works with men as well, but specializes in women. She does leadership development, coaching program design, development and facilitation. She does a lot of stuff as far as empowering women. I want to get into a little bit more about kind of what that process means for you.
Sure.
How does it differentiate from being a life coach, and then the physicality? Do you incorporate physical workout, like any type of workouts, or is it spiritual? How does that work with what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so it's more looking at a person on a holistic level, like how are they managing their lifestyle? What does that look like? And then helping guide them or assist them in finding the right people to fit those needs. I'm not a personal trainer. Well, I do work out and know a lot about fitness, not a personal trainer, not a nutritionist, not a doctor, not a therapist. So it's empowering them to find what they need in life. So coaching often is sometimes thought about like therapy. Like people are like, oh, you have a therapist, you have a coach. They are similar, but they're also different. I think of coaching as people who really like those high performers, growth mindset, people who want to move above and beyond, but they need somebody to help them get there. Either they're stuck, they don't have the resources, they don't know what to do next, and they need someone to get there. I mean, I work with a coach too, I have for years, and she helps me just get through challenges, somebody to talk to. So in some ways it can feel like therapy because you unpack so much, but it's solutions oriented, it's future focused, it's what do you want to be and how do we get you there, and what are the resources you need. And I, of course, can provide clients like recommendations and referrals for personal trainers or nutritionists or doctors because of my own personal experiences and my network. I can resource them out, but if not, they have to find that stuff themselves because if we want to make change, it's up to us.
Yeah. When Tripp and I were talking, and he kind of showed me when you guys had met, and he was going through your background. I noticed there was a lot of stuff about trauma.
Yes.
In there. Tell me a little bit more, like, and feel free to go at your own, discretion as far as how you want to go into it. But how has trauma affected you in your personal life, and then how do you incorporate that into your sessions with clients?
Sure. So when I was 19 years old, I was robbed at gunpoint in my apartment. I woke up to a masked man standing over my bed with a gun, who the first words out of his mouth were, "If you scream, I will kill you." So 19 years old, worked in a restaurant, was like a kid still, laying in bed, woke up, and it was the first thing I saw out of the corner of my eye.
Oh my God, I literally just got goosebumps thinking about how scary that would be.
And then seconds later, he threw a pillow over my face. And that was the last thing I saw. So that he was in my apartment for what felt like hours, because anytime we're in trauma, it feels much longer than it is. But I tried negotiating with him and asking him, I was like, why are you here? After he threw the pillow over my face, he said, they told me there's a safe in here. He had the wrong apartment.
Oh my gosh.
Because I didn't have a safe. So
were you living alone at that time?
I did have a roommate at that time, but he's like, they told me there's a safe in here. So it was definitely some type of inside job. Yeah. And he had the wrong apartment. I could smell alcohol on his breath, so he clearly had been drinking. And then I tried to negotiate with him. I'm like, take my laptop. I worked at P.F. Chang's at the time. Like, I had no money. So I worked in a restaurant. So I was like, take my laptop, take my phone, like, take whatever you want. I don't have a safe. Like, literally take whatever you want and leave. And he refused to leave and actually raped me. And then dislocated my arm and, like, beat the living shit out of me, pardon my French, before he left. Like, I had gash marks around my mouth. My neck had bruises on it from him holding, like, my neck down. So that was what I always say is, like, the big T trauma, sometimes how trauma is referred, like big T, little t. That was like my first big T trauma when I was 19. Shortly after that, my dad had been battling with opioid addiction for quite some time. So in the 90s, he had surgeries left and right. Knee surgery, shoulder surgery, all sorts of surgeries from use and overuse when he was younger. And if we think back to the 90s when we were young, they didn't regulate prescriptions.
No.
So he had one injury and surgery, fill him up with opioids. A week later, he'd be out, or 2 weeks, however long later he'd be out. They would just keep refilling his prescriptions, and it created an addiction for him. So finally, when he was out of surgeries and no longer had prescriptions anymore, and he couldn't get them refilled, he turned to buying them illegally and then turned to heroin. So my dad, that process made him verbally abusive and not remember what he did. He was one of the most successful people I ever met. Like, he was working for a Medicare Medicaid company. This guy was making like well into six figures when I was a kid, which was a lot in the 90s, and very successful. Went from being that guy to almost homeless because of opioids. And the trauma he caused for me and my brothers in the process was like the next layer of trauma, and that really unfolded after my trauma. I think what happened to me really kind of set him on this downward spiral too. I think just witnessing that as my father and being like, I couldn't help my daughter in that time. Really, I saw him unspiral from that. He was suicidal on top of being verbally abusive. So that was like my next layer of trauma that I dealt with. He passed in 2020. And then between the years of 2016 and 2022, I had 7 deaths. And one being my father in 2020, which is an interesting death. And I've done podcasts just on that death alone because it's very interesting. And then last year, one of my brothers and one of my best friends were both killed less than 6 months apart. So for me, trauma's been, I'm 31, I'll be 32 this month in next month, I guess, September 2023. So from 19 to 30 or 31, just that span of trauma and that collective was a lot. So I found for me kind of how I got into coaching was I didn't start healing until I looked at myself on that holistic level. How was I eating? How was I sleeping? How was my mental health? What is my exercise regimen? And that's when I truly started to heal, which is what made me want to become a health and wellness coach. And just because of my experiences and like my life story, it's naturally attracted clients to me who have also had trauma because I can relate and I can empathize. I didn't go the therapy route because I hated how clinical therapists felt. Doesn't mean they're not helpful.
Same.
Yeah. Doesn't mean they're not helpful. Doesn't mean they're not amazing and they don't do great work. But it was so frustrating sitting there and being like, this happened to me, like this instance when I was 19, and the person sitting across from me is just like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. How do you feel?
They scribble something down.
Yeah.
Like, what did you
Yeah. Instead of sitting across from me, like my coach now has told me about stories, which is, again, another reason I love coaching. She's like, for example, when I broke off a long-term relationship with my ex, she told me about her divorce. She told me about things that I can relate to, which I can do in coaching, which I think is why I tend to work with a lot of people with trauma, because I've been through a lot of trauma and I can relate and I get it, instead of working with someone who you're like, I don't know. I mean, I don't focus on that because, again, I'm not a therapist. We don't unhash trauma and deal with that. Yeah. It just has been a natural progression.
Do you feel like the connection and conversation portion of it is the most important part? Because with therapy, it's very one-sided, right? Do you think those two factors are huge in what's going on there?
In coaching?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the reasons coaching is becoming so large and prominent and, I mean, helping people so much is because of the relationship you build. In therapy, it is I'm going to my therapist for them to help me and to just for them to get me through whatever I'm going through. And I've been through years of therapy. Like, I think therapy is amazing. But with coaching, you build this relationship with a person where you trust, they hold you accountable, they call you on your shit, which therapists can't be like, why are you doing that? You're manipulating, you're self-sabotaging, you have imposter syndrome. Coaches can say that. So it allows what I found for me personally, and I've seen with my clients, is you heal way faster, you grow faster than you ever do in therapy because you're not talking about everything that happened. You're focusing on the future, getting to the future, and somebody's holding you accountable and holding space to help you get there.
And also empowering you too, right? Like, listen, like you're taking back control of your life now. It's like you can control your workouts, you can control your schedule, and that gives you more power, right? Like,
oh yeah, and too, when I have clients that'll come to me and be like, "Listen, we talk about all sorts of stuff in coaching, and it still is confidential, but they'll come to me and be like, I hate my job. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do about it? And they're like, well, I don't know. So I'm not like the one that like, okay, here's your plan. Here's what you're going to do. They have to figure it out. I can give them tools and resources and recommendations or podcasts or books or things to listen to help them get there. But at the end of the day, the choice is ours. So coaching only matters or it only actually works if you have a growth mindset and you're committed.
yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, let's go into just for a bit into that trauma. So with kind of healing from trauma, experiencing it, and I know there's a lot of people out there who have gone through it, experiencing the trauma, whether it's little or hugely traumatic like yours, do you feel like, because you can get stuck in that, right? Time can pass and you're not healing. So for you, when you look back at that, with all the trauma you've been through, the deaths and that incident when you were 19, and you said you started to heal later on. What was the key? What was it? You mentioned nutrition. You mentioned like exercising. What was it? Was that it? What was the big thing to like start to identify the trauma and then move past it? How give us some idea of that?
Yeah. So it was, I think, that whole holistic thing. So immediately after trauma, most people jump into therapy, they just need to talk about what happened and process it. So I think the first step for me was processing it. I was in a lot of therapies. I was in victims advocacy groups. I did that work. But then I was in college too. I was 19 at the time. So the things I was thinking about wasn't, what time am I going to bed? Am I going to bed consistently at the same time I'm waking up consistently? How is my stress? What is my diet? What should I not be eating? What is my blood work telling me? So once I started to do that and invest my life into having a consistent schedule, having a healthy lifestyle, like where I actually had a healthy lifestyle, investing time in relationships, friendships or romantic, whatever that was, feeling fulfillment and that balance on that scale. Like there's something called the Wheel of Life, which we often do in coaching, and I've done it in facilitation too. It's a fun exercise where you write 8 to 10 things that are like they call them sometimes your life domains, or like the key things you value. So people typically put like health as one, or they'll put relationships. They may put their partner, like they pick those 8 or 10 things that they value, and then you rate your level of effort within each of those. And if those are unbalanced, you think about a car wheel, you can't drive your car wheel if it's all crooked. So when we find the best happiness and success and prosperity in our life is when we have balance in the things that are important to us. So when I started to focus my life from that lens and focus on what is important to me, how am I healing all of that, and how am I taking care of myself on that big picture scale, that's when I truly started to heal. So therapy, yes, I was on a lot of prescriptions too at the time because I was 19. It's 2011. I didn't know any better. Then it came to the natural healing. So it was a lot of prescriptions. But then when I shifted off of the prescriptions, which I think was about 2015, I can never remember the date. I should have wrote it down, but I didn't. When I shifted off of prescriptions and healed myself and focused on every aspect of my life that needed attention, not just the mental health side, that's when I noticed the most healing.
What was the drive? Like what inspired? Some people just live in their trauma, right? And they just have. What inspired you that time? What drove you to want to heal and to?
I wanted to heal from the time it happened. Because my biggest thing was I didn't want this guy to win. So by him doing what he did to me, I had 2 choices. One, I always say I could get bitter or better. I could be bitter that this happened to me and was out of my control, or I could get better and live this awesome, amazing life that I'm not going to let him impact and have an influence on. And that was my drive of I wanted to be the person always wanted to be more even better than I ever thought I could be, regardless of what happened to me. So it was like a self-inner drive, which I've always had from the time I was a kid, thankfully, which I know doesn't come naturally to people, which is why I also do a lot of coaching, because some people are like, I'm missing that motivation. I'm missing that determination.
Do you tell your story? Like, do you do you find power in retelling your story in some capacity ever? Like, do you find power in that, in almost like not pride, but somewhat sense of pride, or do you just not talk about it the majority of your life, or do you have people that you talk about it with? Do you mention it to clients? Like, how does that work?
So for the up until probably 2020, so 3 years ago, I was decently private about it. So a lot of my friends knew, obviously all my family knew, but there were a lot of people in my life who had no idea. I would tell like some colleagues and bosses because they needed to understand that I had different needs. All in humans are individuals and we all have different needs, but most people are afraid to articulate that. So I made sure to be transparent and articulate that up front because I still did get triggered for long periods of times. I mean, I'll have PTSD for the rest of my life. It's not going to be level 10, but I will have PTSD for the rest of my life. So I had a circle of people who knew, but I still had plenty of friends, colleagues, clients who didn't know. And then in 2020, when I published my blog, that was the first time I publicly shared it. And I think up until 2020, I was always afraid that if I publicly shared my story, this guy could find me.
Well, how did you feel after you posted that blog?
Amazing. So that's the thing now is like talking about it now. I don't like choke. I mean, sometimes I choke up, but it's much easier. I can have a conversation now where years ago it was still so much at the surface that it was more difficult. So now I'm at a place that I can talk about it. It does feel good. It helps me to help others too. When I posted that blog, I had a lot of women reach out and say, this was helpful for me, or I shared this with a friend who's going through something similar. And it made them feel not alone, which I always felt after that happened to me. When I was 19 years old, I felt so alone. And when I published that blog, for people to say this helped me not feel alone was very affirming. So now it is empowering and helpful to talk about. And if I can help one person, that's all that matters. But years ago, it wasn't. Now the deaths, when I talk about like my brother passing or my best friend passing, those were a year and a half ago. So those are like me talking about my trauma, a year and a half after. It's still much more at the surface. I can talk about it, but emotions still do surface.
Yeah. Do you work with when their clients? Do you talk about death? Is that? I mean, I'm sure you talk about it, but is that part of your not your business, but part of like the conversation? Do you help people who are healing from people passing?
Honestly, with coaching, they drive it. So whatever they want to talk about, the space is theirs. What the best coaches give clients the ability to come to a conversation with whatever's on their mind and help them unpack it. So I've had people talk to me about death. I tend to work with a lot of women who are like Gen Z and millennials, so a lot of them haven't experienced death yet. And there are a few who have that I've worked with, and we'll talk about that and have conversations, but most of them haven't experienced any death yet, so they're very fortunate.
Yeah, I think sometimes, especially in trauma, like people run from their emotions. Like it's almost not shamed. I feel like shamed is used too much, but like, I don't want to. Yeah,
almost like the white picket fence kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's like I think that sometimes can be powerful to feel those emotions. It shows you care about certain things, even if it's a bad experience. It shows that like we're human. Without emotions, we're robots, right? And it's like why are we afraid of our emotions? There's still things that I talk about where I'm like, man, I still feel so powerfully about that.
Well, I think too is a control factor. Some people cannot control their emotions. They don't know how to use them in a positive way, and I think that people like you you channel those kind of things, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm an emotional intelligence coach and trainer, so we talk about that. Like, how do your emotions have power? And our society often, as we know, like for the longest time, we were taught to suppress emotions. And I think that is now changing in the way we operate. But what I have found with people too is, I mean, you have to build relationships with people before you can just tell them everything. Like I don't go meet somebody and say, hi, my name is Tamara. When I was 19 years old, I was robbed at gunpoint and raped in my apartment. Like that's not how I open.
He's so aggressive.
But what's fascinating is when I have clients both in like my coaching business or the consulting work that I do, and when we develop that relationship and I share with them what happened, they're like, holy shit, I would have never thought that anything has ever happened to you bad. And when I've met people that are like, oh, I thought you were Miss Perfect and like you had a great life. I'm like, that's funny but again, that's the choice. I chose to not be this person who's wrapped up in my trauma. I chose to heal from it.
What's the power? There's always and this is a little philosophical, I apologize. There's always a reflection of the good and bad in life and anything we do. Even with music, there's negative harmony. So what's the power with trauma? What somebody goes through something horrible. Doesn't matter what it is. It's horribly traumatic. What's the power in that? How do you make sense of that and articulate that?
Like, how do you find the good?
Yeah, if somebody comes to you, they say, Tamara, I'm dealing with this horrendous thing. My dad passed away, and I literally am crushed. And obviously we're being hypothetical, but I'm sure that happens. What do you tell them?
Yeah. I think they have to find that. Like, you have to find the meaning in everything. So when I was 19, I was like, why did this happen? Like, this makes absolutely no sense. Like, why would a 19-year-old girl who's in college, supposed to be having the best 4 years of her life, wake up to a masked man standing over her bed with a gun, holding it to her face, and then like seeing her life flash before her eyes? Like, how does that make any sense? So for the longest time, I was like, I don't understand it. And until I became a coach, that's when I realized. I was like, oh, that had to happen to me in order for me to be able to help other people. So I encourage my clients, I'm like, it takes time to figure out sometimes why trauma had to happen to us. And it doesn't mean it's fair or it's right. And it's out of our control. Like my dad being a drug addict and verbally abusive and passing, that was out of my control. But I have to either choose, like, it's back to that bitter or better piece. When those experiences happen that are out of our control, we have a choice to choose what we're going to do with it. So the past is over. We can't go back. So how are you going to move forward? And what do you want that to look like? Do you want that to look like you being somebody who's pissed off and angry and living in a revenge cycle? Or do you want to be this person that people admire, want to be around, want to work with, look up to? Like, which do you want to be? And you may find like your purpose or your why as to why a trauma had to happen 6 months after, 6 years, or 60 years. I think you'll never know. And it's different for each individual.
Well, I had a grandpa who was murdered at 87 with a baseball bat, and I kept on asking myself, why did this happen?
Yeah.
And when I asked, what can I do about it, is when things changed.
Yeah.
So what do I want to be? Do I want to be like a shitty kid who's just doing drugs all the time, or do I want to make my grandpa proud for what he lived for? So that's great that you try to explain the narrative.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the biggest thing.
Well, and there's often too, instead of why did this happen to me, why is this happening for me? Like what can I do from this? So for me, again, it was, okay, this happened to me when I was 19, and that has now enabled me to be a better coach and a better professional in the work that I do. It's allowing me to now help people change and help workplaces change in the best way ever. If that didn't happen to me, maybe I wouldn't be here. But that is how I've had to like find that. Instead of why did this have to happen to me? What was, how is the good come from that?
And is that how you connect with people through trauma? Is it like your stories or whatnot? Do you ever go through and explain stories to your clients and try to make some relevancy out of them, or do you try to leave a little bit of that out and let them have their session?
So coaching's about them. There's often times where I'll have to say, like, listen, I get how you feel and here's why. And then if they want to know more, I'll share more. But I'm not there to be a soapbox and make it about me, because nobody wants to go to a coach who talks about them for the whole 45 minutes or hour session. So I will sometimes share, or oftentimes like they read my blog or they know me and somebody shared the experiences I've been through. So if they're sitting in front of me and they're like, hey, I lost a sibling, I'll be like, I lost a sibling too. I get it. Like, I get that. Or I've experienced death too. I understand. But unless they say, like, tell me more, or can you share some tips or tricks, I don't want to focus on me, because I'm not there to heal myself. I'm there to help them transform their lives and who they want to become.
Some people, I was thinking when you were saying that, some people, I noticed this a lot of time with some people, not necessarily like depressed, but when they're like really going through tough moments in their life, they just want a friend to be around, and sometimes they don't want to talk about themselves. You ever notice that? Like, they just want to be around somebody who's positive and good and talks about themselves. Sometimes I notice that too. I was just wondering if that's like, part of what you do is like, they have to talk about themselves. Is that like, or are there ever any moments where you just do like a hangout and then you're like talking about, like, is there anything like that or no?
Not really.
I noticed that in personal training, or even on other times where I ask somebody about their, like, hey, what's going on? And I can tell they don't want to talk about their, I don't want to talk. I'm like, all right, cool, I'll talk.
So sports.
And then literally, no, 100%. And then you're just talking about things that really aren't important. And kind of through that, they just go, and they're like, oh, okay. And they just kind of relax. I just was, thinking about that. But I suppose it is good to dig into, people don't get a chance to articulate sometimes these deep-seated things, and have a good sounding board.
Well, I mean, the first session or two, sometimes people don't talk as much because we're building that relationship, and some people aren't as willing to be vulnerable right away. So there are times where I'm asking more questions or talking a little bit more than they are.
Yeah.
But it's usually not me really sharing a lot of stories unless like I'm booked for a speaking engagement or a podcast or facilitating a training. Then I'm talking a lot more about my personal experiences in my life.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What's the foundation of your training from a religious perspective or a spiritual perspective? Do you hold a particular religious belief or worldly belief that affects the way that you approach your coaching?
I'm not affiliated with any religion. I'm spiritual. Like I believe there's a higher power. But I support people in whatever they believe. Like if they have a religion, then let them stick with that and honor that. And I've worked with people who are very religious, but I don't have a religious affiliation personally.
Gotcha.
But I do believe in I've had a lot of people who have passed. So I've gone to mediums. I've done all of that stuff just because I do believe that there's more out there than just us.
Tell us about that.
Yeah.
I want to hear about a yeah. Give me a little taste of that. For some people, think it's hokey. Some people swear by it. So on the Health or High Water podcast here with Trip and I, it's
Well, energy can't die; it just moves on.
Law of entropy. Yeah. So is it? Is there some merit to that?
I believe so. So for me, there's a lot of your personal trainers. There's a lot of bad personal trainers out there. It's it's the same thing. There's a lot of bad mediums and a lot of bad psychics out there. So you have to be very careful. I've been to a lot that I will never go to again, and I've been to a couple that I continue to go to, and I will go to a lot. And those few that I have found that truly have a gift are remarkable and amazing because they have said stuff to me that there is no way they would know. So, for example, my mother's father passed in 2018, so my grandfather on my mother's side. And when he passed, my mom went to a medium, and she's like, I see your father. Why did he leave one of his shoes behind? I can't remember if she said left or right, but she's like, why do I see his left shoe or right shoe, whatever she said. And my grandfather had his knee amputated or his leg amputated from the knee down on one side. So when he crossed over, of course, he wouldn't have brought his prosthetic leg with him. So she was seeing his spirit like on that side in his pure form without that prosthetic leg. So she's like, why did he leave a shoe behind? And it's like, how would anyone just know that? Like, and the stuff they've said too about like my brother or my dad and my grandma, like there is no way. I've gone to mediums that know nothing about me. I shared no details with them before I showed up, and my social media is pretty locked down. It's not like they could figure it out. Yeah. And they knew like specific details about my dad or my grandma or my brother that I'm like, there's no way you made this up.
Wow.
So.
Do you supposed to go back to? Sorry to dive into the hole, but
Yeah.
well, I mean, we can make this our podcast. We can do whatever we want with this, right?
Yeah.
We're not beholden to anybody.
Screw the FCC.
Yeah, who's that? Are you supposed to go back to? Do they say, hey, come back in a week? Like, come back in whenever you want?
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, I've gone to some of them regularly. It's because I went to somebody who was like a medium/energy worker because our bodies hold trauma in our organs. So you can energetically heal that through energy work. So I went to that person more regularly, but it was more for the energy work than it was the medium. Some of the mediums I've gone to once and never again. But the ones that I've liked, just given the volume of people that have passed, I go to quite a bit because it's still nice sometimes just to check in and say hello.
I love that aspect of it.
You've read the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
I have.
All right. Give our listeners. I'm sure there's people. I want to say it was a bestseller. If it wasn't, it should be. But thoughts on it? Do you like it? Love it?
Yeah, I love it. I actually recommend it to a lot of people who have gone through trauma, and I've seen it proven true. Like, because I have found myself personally when I'm approaching anniversaries, whether that's the death, whether that's the trauma, those dates when they're approaching, I physically feel different things, like more anxious, different feelings, different emotions, more tired. And sometimes I won't even know it until the date approaches. I've also seen through that energy work that you can actually heal like what is trapped in our bodies. And I've done somatic therapy as well, where you physically get stuff out of your body because we hold it in, like we keep it in. So I do like The Body Keeps the Score because it gives you that science base, but also talks about how our body holds on to trauma internally and not just in our brains.
Well, that's absolutely crazy too, because I feel like that when around my grandpa's death and whatnot, and like it's weird that your trauma is almost on a circadian based rhythm.
Yeah.
It knows.
Yeah. Well, your body remembers. So if you think about it, like to me, any type of trauma, again, little t, big T, which I don't like using as much, but there's a date attached to that. And like when that date comes back up, your body is remembering what happened, even if your brain is not thinking about it. So your body's preparing again for that fight, flight, freeze response, or whatever you went through when you were in that state of trauma, because they remembered. Like it's holding on to that. Your organs and your tissues hold on to trauma much longer than our brains do.
Are you familiar with EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing at all?
I am. I've done it.
Okay. All right. Now, what's that all about?
You go back and relive. So I've done it with a therapist. And if anyone does EMDR, do it with a therapist. Don't just that is something where you rehash and you go back to your trauma and you process back through it. And the goal of it is to desensitize your traumatic response to that exact moment. So I've done it where I went back to my apartment when I was 19 years old and relived those moments, relived those conversations.
Wow.
With your eyes closed, going through a process with a therapist. So it is healing. I think for me, it feels like, this comes in a lot with my coaching, I've done probably like every natural modality you can to heal. I've done EMDR, I've done neurofeedback. I almost did ketamine, did not do ketamine though. All of
That was close.
I was at the door.
Well, it was actually going to be because the FDA approved it, I was going to do it with a psychotherapist there, but I did not do that. But I've just because I've wanted to be able to heal myself in the best way I could, I've explored almost every natural option you can.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to kind of shift gears a little bit about, it seems like every generation or what has their own trauma, and our generations are not shy of that, especially after COVID. What's some commonalities you're seeing in clients across the board that are happening everywhere? That men, women, that's sharing the same kind of trauma.
Yeah, fear is the biggest one. I think everybody's afraid of everything right now. Like there's a lot of anxiety and fear out there of either the future, the present, their past. There's just so much fear and anxiety ruminating. I think because we come from like millennials, Gen Z, our parents were not verbalizing and vocalizing what they went through. A lot of people, it's taking them time to be able to vocalize how they feel and why they feel that way. And sometimes our feelings are deep rooted in childhood, like an experience happened in childhood and we just don't remember it, but that's why we're feeling that way. Or there is something called generational trauma where you can actually be passed down trauma from your parents, your grandparents that they didn't heal. So oftentimes some of the stuff we're healing isn't even what we've experienced. It's what was passed down to us. And I've noticed that because our generation is more focused on healing and taking care of ourselves than the generations before us and being more vocal about that there is a lot of healing of that generational trauma going on.
Yeah, I occasionally mention my dad in this. I was thinking about my dad was a Navy pilot, and he was like the highest stressed guy you'll ever meet. Like everything had to be perfect. And so growing up, like I think about growing up and I'm like, oh, did I screw up? Did I screw up? And then it took me a long time through my 20s to realize and be like, oh, okay, it's not that big of a deal. Like I can chill out.
Well, and that shows up too in like your work, your relationships, like and people don't even consciously realize it half the time. Of like it sounds like yours was repetitive, but oftentimes I'll meet with people that they had like one experience when they were a kid with their mom or dad did or did not do something, and they've latched onto it for years, and they don't even consciously realize it.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and I'm not, do you have kids?
Not yet.
No. Yeah, I don't have kids either. I'm not a parent, so all the parents right now are rolling their eyes.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. But when we look back at like our parents and stuff, we always like, oh, I'm going to be better father than you. I'm going to be better mother than you. And that happens generation after generation after generation. Like that's just the cycle is hopefully we become better at perceiving some of these less than great behaviors. But there's no such thing as being a perfect parent. But this is an interesting generation now. Is like I feel like this is the awakening. The last 15 years, like an awakening of your. Let's go into the naturopath.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's your. Tell me about it. Like naturopath over a regular MD,
yeah.
Right? Is that?
So I do think our generation is just more emotionally evolved than the generations before us. I always say like. I look up to my mom. I admire my mom. Like, I actually want to be like my mother. I want to be nothing like my dad in many ways. I mean, there's some good things about him, but I do hear that as well. And I think that's just a constant thing, though, because that's wanting to be better. And it's not necessarily comparing ourselves, but we talk more about what happened in our childhood than our parents' generation did. And because of that, we're now saying, how do we be different? So just to tie to that, on the naturopath. So yes, I've been working with a naturopath for since 2019, I think 2019. And I switched over to naturopathic medicine because one, when I went off prescriptions from the PTSD and anxiety when I was 19, I didn't like prescriptions because of my dad being an opioid addict. So I was like, I don't like being given a pill to solve a problem because I'm not getting to the root cause of what's going on. And there's much more deep-seated issues here. Then there's a reason for me being anxious. There's a reason for me not being able to sleep. And I get that this pill is going to help me get through that, but that's not going to long-term give me the benefit I need. So I switched over to a naturopath because every time I would go to a regular MD and I would talk about what happened to me, and they're like, oh, do you need an anxiety medicine? Or do you need this? Or do you I'm like, no, I want to like be able to function and be an amazing, productive member of society without 13 pills in front of me at any given time.
And side effects and all this. I lived that life in college. I get it.
Yeah. Well, in anxiety medication, they're now saying benzos long-term use leads to Alzheimer's.
That's just a start of what we're going to find out.
I was
about
going to say, I totally believe that.
Yeah. So for me, I was like, I don't know what I'm putting, and I saw what opioids did to my father. So I was like, I don't want to go down this route. And so when I switched over to a naturopath, it was somebody actually helping me heal holistically. And again, helping me from that medical level that I couldn't do. It's nice because I've learned a lot. My friends love to text me every time they have a cold or they need some type of natural like remedy for anything, because I've learned so much over the course of all my research and time for how to heal things with supplementation, teas, because I have tinctures. Like I have found that you don't need prescriptions. Like, yes, I'm not anti-prescription. I'm not anti-Western medicine. I've had 2 surgeries. I firmly believe that there is a time and place for Western medicine, but it's not to get to the root cause. Like, you have to get to the root cause first to truly heal, or you're just going to keep putting a Band-Aid. And that's what the naturopathic medicine does. So I work with a naturopath in Boulder.
Well, I use that all the time. It's a Band-Aid on a gash.
Yep.
And that's the truth. It's like and then you're adding more Band-Aids to it, but the gash is getting bigger.
Yeah.
Right? And then one day all that falls apart, and then you're left in the same spot you were when you started all that stuff.
And that's exactly what I realized with my healing. Of like, I was taking, because when I was 19, I needed anxiety medication. I needed sleeping pills. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I tell everybody, do what you need when you need it. But when I did it, no doctor was looking at me saying, this is not the long-term solution for you. Let's make sure that we evaluate this and monitor this and then create a plan to get you off of this. Nobody paid attention to that. Maybe they do now. But I was just easing my anxiety symptoms instead of healing what was causing the anxiety, which is why I was like, I can't do this anymore. If I'm not going to live the rest of my life taking pills just to feel better, and the second I run out of those pills, I feel awful.
Or they stop working so much, so then you have to go back to the doctor. They double up on your medication, and the next thing you know, you're even deeper in the hole.
Yep. And you don't ever feel like yourself. Like, I've talked to a lot of women who have come off of birth control recently, and the hell that they come through just to go off of it because their hormones are all over the place. It's similar to when people go off anxiety medication unplanned with a doctor. They feel awful because your chemical makeup within your brain is not aligned, and you need to align it first. And I have found a lot of natural ways to do that through like the other natural healing we've talked about and more, but doctors don't really necessarily focus on that. Well,
no, and speaking on, I know this is a little side tangent, but speaking on birth control, there's a lot of people that are finding when they're in couples and they're coming off birth control, that the women's smell of the men's pheromone changes, and they don't like they're not attracted. They're not attracted anymore.
Is that true?
Yeah.
100% true.
Because it changes, if you think about it with birth control, it changes a woman's composition, like your genetic, or not your genetic, but your hormonal composition. So everything about you is different. And then I've had friends that go off of it, and like everything from when they were 15 comes back. All of their acne, crazy cycles, like they have all of these, because what happened was, like, for the millennial generation, we got put on birth control when we were 15 to avoid pregnancy and to treat all of our symptoms. Irregular cycles and acne. And now all of our generation is like, what is going on? I'm not going to do this anymore. And they come off of it, and everything comes back from when they were 15, and they have to heal that.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Well, and our first sense ever as an organism was smell. So it's our strongest sense.
Yep.
Right, and it's actually it's a purifier from breathing through our nose. We try to preach this all the time in fitness. It's like, breathe through your nose. It'll humidify the air, come down.
Yep.
But when you come off the birth control, it changes the way you smell things. hormonally. So like we were saying, like, when couples get together and they decide to have a kid and they come off the birth control, the parents are at each other, the about to be parents about at each other's throats, because the woman's not attracted to the man anymore, and it's a big problem.
That's interesting, huh?
Side tangent there.
Side tangent, I like it. So with your, I'm gonna right back on the rails. Again, it's our podcast. We can do what we want. So with your business now, with your clients you're working on, what's the next step? You've obviously seen some success stories. Is there one that stands out to you? And then also the next part of that is where you're going with what you're doing. Do you love it and you're just continuing to grow with what you're doing?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of success stories. The biggest thing for me is how I like identify success is when clients need to talk to me less. Like I actually love that when they go from twice a month sessions to being like, can we talk once every 8 weeks? I'm like, yes, I'm so excited because with therapy, it's like a crutch. With coaching, I'm like, I want you to be empowered to be the best version of yourself and not feel like you need support. I still believe though, like I said, I have my own coach. I meet with her every 6 to 8 weeks myself, just to somebody holding me accountable, somebody giving me suggestions, somebody guiding me to where I want to be, because I admire my coach. Like I admire where she is in her life. I admire the person she is. So when clients say to me, I want to work with you, I want to scale back, that is like the biggest success for me. And I've had quite a few clients do that. Typically takes most of the time, like at least 6 to 9 months, usually more. But they progressively over time scale back. And that to me is the best part. Then sometimes they'll go through experiences and we'll need to shift back up and then scale back. But I love that. I don't have like one amazing success story that comes to mind. And I also don't want to breach confidentiality.
Please don't.
I'll tell anything about myself, but not my clients. And then where I want to go with it. So one day I do want to write some books. I have 2 books I want to write, one on grief and then one on my life. And then I also hopefully will continue to get to do, I've been doing a lot of podcasts, but more speaking engagements, more like workshops and just things around resilience and healing and like just collective bringing people together, because I have found that everybody feels alone when they go through any experience, trauma, grief, breakups, they feel alone. Even if they're surrounded by so many people, they feel alone. So I want to, again, make it so people don't feel alone in those processes.
Isn't it kind of a little ironic that we are the most connected we've ever been in society, and yet we're fearful and alone?
Well, it's because we're sitting behind screens.
Right.
Oftentimes.
It's not a real connection.
Yeah. And I can't even count the number of clients that I'll talk to and be like, when's the last time you like sat down and had a real conversation with a friend and like told them what is going on and how you're feeling and ask them how they're feeling? And almost 100% of the time they're like, I can't remember. Like we don't do that anymore. We live in like these highlight reels between social media, and people don't want to talk about the difficult things with their friends typically, unless they're in the real thick of it. But even if they're dealing, like I have clients who will be dealing with like relationship problems or other health problems. And I'm like, who have you told in your support group that you're going through this? I'm like, no one. I'm like, how do you expect to feel supported and empowered if you are in this alone?
Well, I think, like you're saying too, they're fearful of being judged or prosecuted or whatever was the right word for that. But they're feared of being judged.
This has been a fantastic conversation. There's so much good stuff, and I know in the future you're going to do a lot of speaking events. I'm excited for your book. I know I'm going to get the first copy. Maybe not the first, but I want to be at the top of the list. There's a lot of people that are going through trauma right now, and I think it's great that we're normalizing it. And I think you're right. We are the generation that is starting to discuss and understand our emotions and not feel ostracized from our own bodies. So this has been a fantastic conversation. Mr. Tripp, your final thoughts on this?
Just let's give you a little plug where they can find your blog, website. If they want to have you on as a podcast, we had a funny conversation about Matchmaker.fm before, but where we found each other. It's a podcasting.
It's a podcast.
Yeah, it's not. It looks like a dating site, which is hysterical. But where can they find you? A little bit more about some maybe events you're doing in the future here, and yeah.
Yeah. So my website is Awaken Empowerment. So if you can link that in the show notes.
100%.
Awesome. So it's awakenempowerment.com, and then you can contact me directly through there. I'm also on LinkedIn, but my social media is all private and locked down. Not a social media person. I don't have anything like for my coaching that I'm doing currently coming up, but I will publish all like my speaking events, all my other guest podcasts that I've done are linked on there, and anything I do in the future, that will be on there as well, like my books as well. So check out my website, and then if they are interested in having me as a guest or working with me, they can contact me there.
I love it.
That sounds great. This has been one of the most eye-opening and a great conversation we've had on here about trauma and trying to get through things. I mean, that's what we're kind of doing on the physical side here as well. So it was a great connection, and we just appreciate you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for our new listeners, and thank you so much for our followers who have been following this journey from the beginning. You can find all the links in the description below. Have a great day, and take care.
Like, share, subscribe, please.
That was great. Thank you.